Okay, so now we can start. So first of all, many, many thanks to Elena for inviting me here. You said thanks for taking the trouble. It's never a trouble to come to Spain, okay? So it's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in the region of Valencia and in Castelló, so thanks for giving me that opportunity, and thank you to the whole organizing committee for getting me here. It's a great pleasure. And I think Elena already really preempted a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. But I wanted actually to add something quite interesting to what you said. And that is that a study that was done at the Institute of Education, we have a very interesting group of studies called cohort studies. So children who were born at certain years are being followed and they're being tested every 5 or 6 years, I'm not sure. So children who were born in 1970 were tested in 1975, 80, 90, interviews with parents and so on. And every time they do a slightly different study, they found that the best predictor of success in secondary education is the amount that the parents read to the child when the child was young, 2, 3, or 4, okay? So that's a really, really interesting study. So how much your parents read to you is going to predict your vocabulary and your skills at the age of 16, okay? I think I can go now, okay? I've said what I want. Okay, joke. So what I want to do today, my area, I'm interested in teaching literature in the language classroom. As Elena said, I was a secondary school teacher for 8 or 9 years in classrooms with 40 students, okay? When there was a flu epidemic and I only had 30 students in my classroom, I was really happy, okay? That was great. So large classrooms and so on, but we did use a lot of literature. And that's where it all started. And I always loved using literature, and I'm really pleased that I've been able, in the rest of my career, to look at that, do some research into it, and so on. So what I'm going to do today is present a few theoretical points, but then really talk you through 10 different techniques which we can use with literature in the language classroom, okay? So I'd like to start with this quote, which is quite important to me for various reasons. It's actually printed on your handout as well. So maybe sort of it's taken from an article by Anthony Jennings in a book edited by Ron Carter and John McCrae. And Jennings talks about the balance between thinking about content and thinking about methodology. And in this quote, maybe if you want to read it, I'll give you about sort of 20 seconds to read it. Okay, so what Jennings seems to be saying is that basically we have a lot of techniques to use in presenting language in literature, okay? But we don't really talk about content. And I read this and I thought, you don't know what you're talking about, okay? Because this is a quote that I totally and utterly disagree with. I think a lot of people talk about content, what we should be teaching, but I think there is a big issue with the way we use literature in the language classroom. And unfortunately, I think very often what we have in the literature and language classroom is what Brian Tomlinson describes here in this quote. Okay, so what you very often have is a dominating expert who interrogates diminished learners about literature which they feel to be at a great distance from their lives. The teacher has studied the text and knows the right answers. The learners are reluctant participants in a negative quest for comprehension. Okay? a bit like what we're doing now. I'm talking to you, okay? So you're sitting there and you have no choice. But basically, that's what happens very, very often. I think it happens for a variety of reasons, but I think really what you have is the teacher standing and sort of throwing the literature at the learners and very often telling the learners about the literature rather than students getting involved. A bit like this. So this is my English teacher when I was 16 or 17 or 18, okay? I'm not in this picture, I'm sort of sitting at the back in the row there, and this is something slightly different, okay, more interactive and so on. So I hope what we are really going to talk about today and try to do is the move from here to here, okay? Now, why does this happen? It happens for a variety of reasons. An interesting study that Leni Bouwman did in the Netherlands, she went and talked to teachers and to learners about using poetry, and she found something very interesting. The children didn't have a problem with poetry. They enjoyed it, they liked it, okay? What's the difference between a poem and a song and so on, nursery rhyme and so on? They don't know the difference, okay? Either they enjoy it or they don't. The teachers were very worried because poetry is important. So if I'm teaching poetry, I need to know everything about the poet, about the poem, and so on. This is what I sometimes call the tyranny of totality, this feeling that you have to know everything, and they were really, really, really worried. So that's one point. Another really interesting point that is actually not on your handout, because sort of I came across it slightly later, or sort of realized that this was relevant, is a point made by Christiane Lütke in a very interesting book which talks about Shakespeare in the second language classroom. And she says, if you always think about using literature, using pre-reading, while reading, post-reading, if you are in that frame, then really there's a danger that it may lead to a neglect of the individual piece of literature and its formal and aesthetic intricacies. And that's why I, over the years, have developed my thinking in terms of appropriate methodology. So appropriate activities that are designed for a certain text. And they may not work with other texts. And that's the thing that we as teachers really need to understand. And the appropriate methodology works and we need to think about the appropriate methodology in a number of sort of parameters. We need to talk about the aims, think about the aims. Why are we teaching literature? And here I also maybe should say that I use the word teaching, but really I also like to use the word using literature. Okay? Teaching literature means for me really just focusing on the literary qualities and that's it. Using literature means that I'm engaging with the literature and the students are engaging with the literature and we're using it to understand the literature itself, but also to learn language. So I use the word using literature and teaching literature almost interchangeably. We need to think about who the learner is, okay? What is right for the learner, okay? At which level are we doing things? We need to think about the teacher, okay, and we'll talk about that. We need to think about the text, and we need to think about the task. And my next slide is a few words about tasks, because there's a lot of talk among English teachers about task-based learning and teaching. And I think that a lot of what we do in classrooms, and we call them tasks, are not tasks. So I'd like to give you one definition of tasks. For me, it's one of the best definitions, but it's not in a way definitive. I mean, there are different, other people define it slightly differently. But Peter Skehan makes the following points. First of all, meaning is primary. Meaning is the most important thing in any task-based activity. There is some communication problem to solve. So you need to do something, okay? It's a solving issue. It's a thinking issue. And Elena also mentioned in your introduction, you mentioned critical thinking, okay? So maybe it's not critical, but there is thinking involved. There is some sort of relationship to real-life problems. task completion has priority. Really important, okay? You need to complete the task. The assessment of the task is in terms of outcome. And I sometimes like to talk about a tangible outcome. Okay, that outcome has got to be something that I, as the teacher, can see. So very often in my classes, both when I'm teaching language or when I'm teaching on the MA program, okay, if there is group work, you need to produce a poster. I want to see that poster. Because if I tell you just discuss, I don't know what you're doing. Whereas if I'm asking you to produce a poster, I can very quickly see that you're not writing the poster. Okay? Learners are not giving meanings of others to regurgitate. The tasks are not concerned with language display, and they do not embed language into materials in order to focus on specific structures. All these are actually on your handout, on the first page of your handout, okay? So if you don't have a handout, I don't know if there are any spares anywhere, but yeah. Okay. Right. So this is the framework. And I'd like to talk now a bit about literature and the value of using literature in the classroom. Now, I'm a teacher, was a teacher in secondary school, and of course, you walk, you go to a cafe, and suddenly who comes into the cafe? A student that you taught 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 30 years ago, okay? And so which of these two sentences do you think one of my students once said to me? Okay. Oops, no, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong slide. Mea culpa, okay? Something else that I wanted to talk about, tasks. So again, the following task my suggestion is explore male attitudes towards women in Renaissance times. This is not a task. So Pointner uses the word task, but this is not a task, okay? Because if we go back, okay, there is no communication problem. There is no actual outcome there, okay? I don't know what they're supposed to be doing. I can make it into a task if I say, on your poster, write 3 points about the difference between male attitudes to females, the difference between Renaissance time and current time. Okay? Not explore, discuss. Think about specific things, and I want you to write them on the poster as points to make. Okay, so really important. Again, Grimm, in the same volume, these are all from a volume on Shakespeare, a task-based approach that asks student teams, groups to come up with their own readings of the speech. This is beginning to come towards a task, okay? If I say, I want you to perform the reading in front of the class, suddenly there is an outcome. Do you see what I mean? They need to do something, and they need to show me that they've done it. Okay, so I'm sorry, I made a mistake earlier. I was going to talk about the fact that I meet students after sort of many years, and basically, what I have met students who come and tell me, I really loved your lesson about Eveline, James Joyce's Eveline. I've never met a student who came and told me, I remember your lesson about the present perfect. It was really wonderful. But I have met students who said, I loved your lesson about Eveline. I got an email from a student of mine who graduated 30 years ago, and I got an email from him about 6 weeks ago saying he's working with his daughter, trying to get her to read more, and he found some of the material that I used with him 30 years ago. And he's using it now with his daughter. Okay, so that's really the value of literature. Okay, so we're now going to look at a number of different types of tasks. And for that, you really, really need a handout. So is there anybody who doesn't have a handout? One, okay, are there any spare handouts anywhere outside? Okay, right, okay, great. So the first task is the following. The task type is gapping words or lines in a text. And we're going to look at a poem. I'm going to read it to you. And the last line in the poem is missing. And I'm going to ask you to sit in pairs and write that last line. If you know the poem, don't tell your friends what the last line is. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still, he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning," and he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to write the last line, okay, in pairs. Okay, so you'll need to sit next to somebody, work in pairs, and write a last line. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes for this, okay? You may not be able to finish totally, but start thinking about it. 4 minutes. I'm going to ask you to work in groups a number of times, and the way I'm going to signal that I want you to stop is if I raise my hand, and then anybody who sees me raises their hand and has to stop. Okay? Stop talking. Okay? So that's the way we'll do it from now on. Okay, so we've got a number of suggestions here for the last line. Okay, so Maria, do you want to read yours first? A beautiful girl he met. Okay? So again, why did you decide on that line? Okay, so the rhyme. Okay. Anything else? And you meet beautiful girls at the end of the day. Okay, so you went for a happy ending and you were guided by the rhyme. And you were also looking for a rhyme, okay? And with this group at the back, we talked quite a lot about which words rhyme with which, okay? So does bread, because you were looking for a rhyme for bread, does it rhyme with breath? Or no, not really, okay? Because th and d in English are different phonemes, okay? In Spanish, there is some, not quite the same phoneme, but there are some similarity. Okay, so we talked a bit about that. Right, so Julia, where are you? Do you want to read us your line?
Appeared in the darkness, surprisingly dead.
Okay, appeared in the darkness, surprisingly dead. Okay, so why did you kill him?
Well, some people are blaming because they walked and waited for the last sun, and they had no meat, no bread, so they were hungry, I suppose. And Richard Cory, he was so, a gentleman with a big fortune, money. So I thought they killed him.
Oh, you think they killed him? Okay, that's interesting. Okay, but what I find interesting. So Julia and and Patricia. So Julia and Patricia were looking obviously at the rhymes, but they were also looking at the metaphors, light, darkness. Okay, so you wanted a contrast there. Okay, you also talked about the content. There is anger. Okay, and you think they killed him. Okay, your ending doesn't quite tell us that they killed him, but okay, you've got that. You've got surprising. I could go on and talk to Julia and Patricia about why they did it, but there's other things. Angel, can you read us your bit, your line?
Was walking along and lost his head.
Lost his head. What do you mean by lost his head?
This concept of
Okay, so you didn't kill him, but you got him going, sort of going out of his mind. Okay, so lost his head. So again, the rhyme and this feeling about sort of reflection on the content. And then we had Prose, yeah? Left town and was founded. Why did you ask him to, why did you get him to leave town? What's okay? That's not a good answer, actually, but never mind.
It's when Richard Corey went downtown, so we know he's in the town. So we don't want to kill them because we kind of like him.
Okay.
We like have wealthy friends.
Okay.
It's just that he left the town and somebody killed him, which is harmful.
Okay,
It's
right.
not
Right. But you still felt, but that's interesting because you still felt that at the end of this poem he dies.
Well, the poems are always kind of gray, so you're going to have happy endings like all Disney.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Okay, so I'm terribly sorry, Maria, but you're ending with the beauty, you know, the love ever after. Okay, I don't know your name, sorry. Irene. Irene and Jose disagree with that, okay? They say, if we've got a poem where somebody is perfect and everything like that, something's going to happen, okay? And so on. Okay. In a class, what I would do, I would get students to come, write it on the board, we discuss it, etc. And I'll tell you in a minute about what classes do. But let me first read you the poem, okay? With the last line. Whenever Richard Corey went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still, he fluttered pulses when he said, good morning, and he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Corey, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. Okay? So that's quite interesting. And very often, okay, so this is the, so this is the poem with the last line. A lot of groups, was there anybody here who had suicide? You did, okay. And you didn't know the poem from before? You did, yeah, okay, right. A lot of groups do that. I think almost everybody that I've ever worked with on this has, I mean, you sometimes get the people who have a happy ending, but a lot of students connect to the fact that there is something dark in the poem, that sort of they connect to the knowledge of literature and to the idea that, you know, in literature, if somebody is perfect, something's going to happen, okay? So there's going to be a fall at the end. Of course, people think about the rhyme, they think about the meter, and so on, okay? Now, this task works because what you've got here is you've got a poem that is going in one direction, and the last line goes totally differently, okay? So you can take the last line, and people really need to think, and you need to think in a literary way, okay? You really need to bring your knowledge of rhyme, meter, images, metaphors, content, okay, themes. You need to bring that into play when you're writing the last line. So that's one task that I've used with a number of poems. And let me show you another poem where this, I think, works, which is a poem by Sarah Teasdale, The Look. Strephon kissed me in the spring, Robin in the fall. But Colin only looked at me and never kissed at all. Strephon's kiss was lost in jest, Robin's lost in play, but the kiss in Colin's eye. Do you want to make a guess about what the next line is going to be? I will never forget it. Okay, I'll never forget it. Will be never forgotten by me. Any other suggestions? You need a rhyme, right? So what's the rhyme going to be? Best? Which word does it need to rhyme with? Play. Okay. So any suggestions? Never got off my chest. Okay, so jest and chest. Okay, but yeah, okay, so that's a possibility. And if we want something with play, yes? Sorry, never faded away. Okay, but the kiss in Colin's eyes never faded away. Okay, so you also got a bit of that rhyme there. Okay, so nice. Okay, actually, this is the one. Haunts me night and day. Okay. So this is a much quicker, so you see I've taken the same task, I've taken another poem, and it's a much quicker task. With Richard Corey, very often I spend a whole lesson doing this in the class because we read it, I have to read it to the students, they need to think about it, some explanations and so on. The words of this really are quite easy. This is an easy poem in many, many, many ways. Now, students might not think about haunts me night and day, but maybe they will think, makes me sad all day, makes me glad all day, never faded away. Okay, you've got these things there, quite simple things. So this is the same task, again because the last line has a twist, but it's at a lower level. Okay, so I'm all the time looking for poems where I can take the last line away and get my students to work on it. And while they're working on it, they're learning language, they're using language, but they're also sharpening some things about their knowledge or understanding of literature. Okay? The next poem is a poem by Gerald England. Even simpler poem, To MM. The first time we met as, we parted as. Can I ask you to spend a minute on your own, filling in the gaps in this poem? You've got it on your handout. Just do this individually, okay? It'll be quicker if you do it individually, I think. I think this can be quite, if you just let yourself, you can do it quite quickly. But I'm going to ask Patricia to read sorry? Irene, sorry, Patricia is you, sorry. So I'm going to ask Irene to read her version of this poem to us, okay? So can we all just listen? Irene, the floor is yours, okay?
The first time we met as friends, we part as lovers. The second time we met as lovers, we parted as partners. The last time we met as partners, we part as enemies. We did not meet again. We are now not even friends.
Okay, quite interesting because you got them sort of really, there is a circle, okay? So you started with friends, lovers, friends, partners, lovers.
Friends, lovers,
partners,
enemies,
friends, yeah, okay? So you got all the way to enemies, which is quite interesting. Anybody else has got a version they might want to read to us? Any volunteers? Don't all jump at once. No? Yes? Read it. I know it's going to be similar. Yeah.
First time we met as nothing, we bought it as friendship.
Can you read it a bit louder?
The first time we met as nothing, we bought it as friendship. The second time we met as friendship, we bought it as lovers. The last time we met as lovers, and we bought it as nothing. We did not meet again. Now, nothing.
Very interesting. Okay. And what I find interesting is, first of all, that you used, I think most people use nouns in the plural. So lovers, friends, partners. And you started with abstract nouns, so nothing, okay? And then you said something, friendship. Okay, so we parted as friendship. So you're making quite an interesting sort of grammatical thing there. And the interesting thing is also, we are now not even nothing. Okay? So really you've gone quite extreme. And it's interesting that when I do this exercise with classes, some people, there's also one or two people who go to that extreme. We are now not even nothing. Can you imagine what's it? Something you were a lover with somebody, you're somebody's lover, and now you're not. It's not that you're nothing. That's bad enough. You're not even nothing. So that's a very, very bleak view of the world. Okay, yeah. But it's, I had somebody who said, we are now not even enemies, I think they said, or something like that, which is a similar idea. Okay, it's really total sort of, now, this is a very simple poem. It's a poem that I found in a beginner's book. Okay? The original, you can find it on the web. Okay, so if you're really interested in it, find it in the web. But for me, the original here is not important. Okay, it's the way you or the learners make meaning as they write the missing words. And this is also, what I do like about this poem is that it's the circle that relationships go through. Okay? So you start from something you meet, every two people meet as strangers, okay? And then you become something, and then sometimes it fades away. Okay? But I think some of the things I've heard in classes are really, really interesting. And this is a task you can do with very low-level learners. I've given you a reference there to a paper by Gillian Lazar, which does a similar thing with a different poem. And you can take out these words in poems, again, if there's a certain progression, if there's a connection between the words that you're taking out. Okay? Not just any words, but these are all words. So actually, I can read it to you. The first time we met as strangers, we parted as friends. The second time we met as friends, we parted as lovers. Okay? So these are all noun phrases in the plural. And, again, I think learners, even at a low level, would know that. Okay, on to the next task type. And that is gapping words in a prose text. Now, what I'd like you to do here, I've given you on your handout the opening paragraph from Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Most of you will have heard of Robinson Crusoe, of the book. Yeah? Okay, so this is the first page, the beginning of Robinson Crusoe, the first three paragraphs. We've taken words out of the paragraph. They're all below the text. So can I ask you to read this and to think, not as learners, but to think as teachers. What is the pedagogical reason? Why did we take out these specific words from the text? Okay, so try to do this exercise. It's an easy one, definitely for you, but think, why did we take out these words? Okay? Okay, I think many of you have now finished. So, any ideas why we chose these words? Any suggestions?
The context.
Sorry? The context. What do you mean by that?
Meaning that the words before and after are giving me the missing out.
Okay, so it's easy. You're right. This is an easy thing. Yeah. Okay, so there is some context around it that helps me fill it in. Okay, so that's one thing. Anything else? Any other suggestions? Syntax. What do you mean by that? Okay, so it's easy in a way. The grammar and the context just doesn't just give the idea, but also the grammar, okay, that constrains and makes that easy, okay? Any other reason? Is there any literary reasons you think that we might have done that? Are there any groups of words that we took out? Any ideas? Okay, so maybe it's not that obvious what we were trying to do. But you see, we looked at this. It's the beginning of Robinson Crusoe, who is the archetypal man on a desert island. Okay? So that's where sort of this almost a genre started of being abandoned on a desert island, what happens to you, and so on. And we read this, the beginning again. I mean, I read Robinson Crusoe many years ago. So you come to it again. We were looking for texts to work with. And one of the things that struck me very strongly is that he starts with his own context, okay, where he comes from, his family. So this beginning of a story, which is ultimately about man being almost totally alone, starts with the importance of the family, okay? So we took out the sort of mother, brothers, son, okay, sort of to show, sort of these are the words that are connected to family, okay? And also then there are other things that are connected with battle, rambling, okay, again the hint of moving around. Notice that already in this first paragraph, you've got a lot of movement, the first 3 paragraphs, a lot of movement. You've got Germany, Bremen, you've got York, you've got Hull, you've got Flanders, you've got Dunkirk. Okay, already we're moving around the whole world. And this is not 2016, okay? This is the 18th century, okay? We're talking 17th century. We were talking a long time ago when moving around didn't come on EasyJet from Gatwick to Valencia, okay? So there's a lot of movement, and there's a lot of geographical stuff, and there's also the family, and that's why we took those words out. So we just felt that if I'm gapping words in a text, there has to be a reason that is connected to some of the themes in the story. Okay, so if I was working on this with the class, we'd work a lot on the fact that there is a lot about his background, his family context, and so on. Okay, the next type of task that I'd like to show you is when you rearrange lines of a text. Okay, so if I was doing it in a class, I would go in and I would say, do you sometimes quarrel with your friends? Yes? No? What do you quarrel about? And I might get some answers. Do you make up easily with your friends? Yes? No? How would you apologize? Do you apologize to your friends? How would you apologize? What would you say? If you had a big falling out with your best friend, how would you apologize? What would you say? And then I would say, okay, we're going to read a poem. It's called Pals. Okay, what does pals mean? I explain, friends, etc., etc. Now what I've done with it, I've written it as if it was prose. And what I want you to do is to think a bit about a way of rearranging it so that it looks like a poem. Okay, and the poem is, I'm sorry for shouting. Let's be pals. I was wrong the other day. All these months of being friends, I've startled away like a flock of frightened birds. Can I ask you to spend 2 minutes maybe trying to put this poem into a shape, and I've given you some space to do that. Okay? Okay. When I see... Many of you have finished. So let's hear 2 versions, and then I'll tell you something interesting. Okay, so I would like to hear Sophia read your version to us first. Okay?
I was wrong the other day. All those months of being friends have started away like a flock of frightened birds. I'm sorry for shouting. Let's be pals.
Let's be pals. Pals. Okay? And here I could work and say, pals. Everybody, say after me, pals. I could do all this language work, okay? So great, thank you very much. I think that's an interesting version, okay? Now, Julia was going to read her version to us.
I was wrong the other day. All those months of being friends and starting away. I'm sorry for shouting.
Okay, so what Julia did was she totally rearranged the poem, okay? And we start, so you start like a flock, well, how did you start? Like a flock of, where's mine? Like a flock of frightened birds, I was wrong the other day. Okay, so this is a bit of a more disjointed version, etc. Okay. What is interesting for me is that obviously my instructions weren't clear, because I didn't mean for you to rearrange the poem, but almost all of you did it, and I think you did a fantastic job, because I think we're getting different poems through this. What I really wanted was for you just to rearrange it on the page in the same order, okay? So again, I think what this shows you is that A, you've got to be very clear when you give instructions, and B, as a teacher, if students don't do what you want them to do, you have a choice. I can say, no. So I can stop the class and say, you're not doing what I told you to do. You need to do. Or I just give you to do it. And I think in terms of understanding the poem, working on it, language learning, what you did is fine. I think you came up with fantastic ideas, so I'm happy. Okay? So it's...
This rearranging means to change the things in the order you wish. You say to rearrange. Therefore, we all change the sentence, the order. And when I saw you mine, I told you, how can I have this? And you told me, as you want it.
Okay,
so
right.
Yes, rearrange means...
Okay. It's interesting because it doesn't say rearrange, it says arrange it. But okay, fine. It doesn't matter. You know something? As a teacher, this doesn't matter. I think what people came up with is really, really interesting. Okay? But let me show you something, and maybe you'll understand what I meant. Okay? This is the original poem. Okay? So it's the same order, okay? But what is special about the way Brian Patten did it? What does the shape of the poem remind you of? The tears falling, okay. What else? I'm sorry for shouting, let's be pals. I was wrong the other day. All those months of being friends, I've started away like a flock of frightened birds. Those are the birds. Okay, so the words are the birds. Okay, so the words and the birds are the same, and that's what he's done. Okay? So what I've learned from this is that I need to change my instructions and maybe make this clearer. Fine, that's not a... No, it's not your fault. If it's anybody's fault, it's my fault, but actually it's nobody's fault because we've done something creative with a poem, and that's the important thing. And I think it got us understanding things, and actually the way Sophia and Julia rewrote it, and we heard it in the way others rewrote it, gives us an understanding of the poem. They make different poems, which is great. Okay, and I'm sure Brian Patten wouldn't object. I don't know if you know Brian Patten. He's one of the Liverpool poets. This is from a volume that he wrote for children. Okay, so children's poetry. And I think it's an absolutely lovely poem. And it talks about things that are important to children. Fighting with your friends is something that children do all the time. I still remember some of the fights I had as a child, okay, and that wasn't yesterday, okay? So basically, these things we remember, and I think they're important to children. Okay. And now for something totally different. We're going to look at another task type, which is a walkabout. And in a walkabout, I ask students to get up and walk around and read things on the wall. So what I've done is I have put on the wall the beginnings of 4 young adult novels. Okay, there is one novel over there. 4, the pages are the same. I just gave you more so that more people can read. 4 there. There is another young adult novel here, 4. Then there is another one from here, these 4. And then there's the 4th one, which is here. So I'd like you all to get up, go around the room. After I finish my instructions, go around the room, read all of them, then choose the one that you like best and go back to it and discuss it with your colleagues who chose it as well. All right, so thank you. This is really interesting. Nobody chose this. Lots of people chose Jojo's story, and I'll talk about that in a minute. A few people chose this one, and a few people chose The Curious Incident. Okay, so maybe we will start with that huge group over there. Did you discuss the reasons for your choice? Can somebody maybe tell us what the group, as a group, thought? Summarize your discussion. Why did you like it? Why did you choose it?
We thought as a group that this is a kind of philosophical book that pushes you to read between lines and pushes you to wonder things. Things as given as a warranty, like what day is today and why is Tuesday? Why does anybody tell me this is Tuesday and I believe so? And then when the family is dead, is when it's right, guys? Why the people was in the house and is dead and why I'm not? So it's kind of philosophical and introspection that pushes you to wonder things about yourself. And within the classroom, into the didactic scenario, is quite interesting because we may find some students who will wonder things, like why I'm in the classroom, why do I have to listen to the teacher, and then we're in a problem.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anybody wants to add anything from that group to what Irene said?
Because of the syntax, you may practice the present simple because it's all the time, it's dark, so you're teaching grammar while you're reading.
It's a very, very simple text. In fact, it is
a specially written book. It's called Jojo's Story. It's by a woman called Antoinette Moses, and she wrote it especially as, she's a writer, okay? She writes plays, she writes short stories. I'm not sure whether she also writes poems. But she wrote this especially for learners of English. And notice what she manages to do with this simple syntax and simple words, okay? This is quite a low level, okay? And she has written a fantastic story. Actually, Jojo is alone and he was saved because people came and killed the whole family. And he's I think 10 or 11 years old, and he's then taken as a soldier, as a child soldier in an African country. And we don't know which country. The country is not named, okay? So this becomes quite complicated and quite serious. But it's very easy to read. Now, what I liked about what you said, Irene, is that they need to read between the gaps, okay? And reading literature, a lot of reading literature is filling the gaps between what is said and understanding what is not being said. This is a great text for that, okay? So thank you very much to this group. Let's go to the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. Would somebody like to summarize what you thought about it? Yeah, go on.
We have discussed about going to view, which is written in first person and written by a child, one of the child. And we are going to teach to use it, to teach the children, maybe useful if they can relate to the character. And also I have read the story and I have found a really interesting story.
I love it.
Do all of you know it? No? You read it. Okay. So why did you choose it? You don't know it. I mean, I think if you know the story, you really you love it. Okay, I don't know anybody who didn't love it, but yeah, why did you choose it?
Because I read the dog was there, and then there was a garden for taking out the dog, and I just thought, who would describe that? Who would just write about a dog that was murdered or killed with a garden for it?
So you thought, you were thinking, who can this narrator be? Right? Is that what you...
Yeah, and also I thought that that's probably the question that the young adults want to wonder, why is this going on, you know what I mean? So I thought that it was a good book to actually have work on in a history class for young adults.
It's actually a very popular book in a lot of secondary schools around the world, okay? It's really, it's a great book, and it was made into a fantastic play. But I could go on about that. Okay, so some of you chose Slam. This is from a book called Slam by Nick Hornby. Do you want to tell us why you chose this one? Okay. Right.
We like the overall writing style because we think young people can feel closer to the main character.
Sorry? It's easier, yeah. Yeah, it draws you in. Okay.
Now, these three are written in first person. Okay, so let's think about who is the narrator, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Nobody chose this book, which is actually, I think, quite wonderful. And maybe that's connected. Maybe you didn't connect to it immediately because it's about somebody else, whereas in the other three, you've got the I, the narrator, and you immediately connect to him. Okay, so this technique is called the walkabout. Do you want to go back to your seats and we'll talk about it a bit? So this technique is called the walkabout. Okay, and you can do a lot of things with walkabout. I put the beginning of poems, of stories here. You can give 3 or 4 different poems and people choose. Some teachers put even homework, okay? They put homework on the wall and the class goes and reads. In that case, of course, you can't choose the best homework because then it becomes a competition between the children, but you can go and see what the other people have written. So instead of all of us sitting and listening to somebody, we could just go around and see what they've done. So for example, with Richard Corey, I could ask people to write the last sentence on a big poster, put it on, and then everybody walks around and sees it, okay? So it's quite, what they call, this is a generative technique. It's a technique that you can use with many pieces of literature in many different ways. Okay. The next task type I'd like to talk about is something that we've already led into, and that is this whole question about who is the narrator. And already when we talked about these novels on the wall, you already asked yourself, who is the narrator? What's happening here? So what I'd like us to do now is I'd like you to read the beginning, this sort of beginning of a novel, and try to answer the questions below it. Okay, and I'll give you about 4 or 5 minutes for it, and then we'll try to discuss it very briefly. Okay? Okay, any suggestions? Is it a man? Is it a woman? What's the relationship? What's happening here? Who is the narrator? What is the narrator waiting for? Who is the narrator waiting for? You thought it was a man.
Why?
Because he was waiting for, he says, her Madonna eyes. You are either mega super gay or you like women. So that's what I thought has to be a man, although can be a woman as well.
Okay.
Maybe a special woman.
Okay, so it could be a woman waiting for a woman that she's in love with, okay? Although she's never met her, right? I think it tells us she's never met her, so she's in love with a woman that she's never met.
She's hiding the
We're not reading about this book, okay? Something is interesting there.
Any other suggestions? Who thought it was a man? The narrator. Okay, quite a lot of people. Okay, why? Why did you think it was a man? Do you want to tell us? You.
No, in fact, I don't really know, because she was saying it was a woman, I was saying it was a man, but because maybe of her Madonna eyes.
So the relationship, sorry.
Yeah.
The relationship is strange, right? Something is not quite clear. I mean, who is she waiting for, sorry, or who is the narrator waiting for more? The man or the woman? The man. Can you prove it to me? Prove it to me. Or show it to me. Indicate it to me. How can we, where do we see that? Behind her, for whom I've waited so long. Okay? Right, so wait, sort of, he for whom I've waited so long, who has talked so unbearably through my nightly dreams. Okay? I don't remember your name, I'm sorry. Can you, Oscar, yeah, can you give us your explanation? And do you still believe it? But tell us what you think.
Well, my explanation was that the narrator was actually a woman, and in fact it was the mother, one of the other characters, the man, which appears on the left. And I thought that the other woman, which came in the left, was her fiancé, and that the man was her own son.
Mm-hmm.
So she was waiting for her son and her fiancé, who she had never met before. And that is the reason why she's so nervous and so on and has so many interpretations.
Do you see how we could go on talking about this for at least another 20-25 minutes? Okay. This is incredibly rich, and this is a very, very complex text. I'm not suggesting that this is a text you can do, you know, in an EFL classroom, okay, in sort of preparing for the bachillerato or things like that, okay? But this is the type of task that I think is very, very, very fruitful, okay? I've done this task with the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime, where I just gave the first page to the class, and I said, who is speaking? Is it a man? Is it a woman? Is it an adult? Is it a young person? How do you know? Anything else? And in a classroom that I did it with, again, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds in Chile, okay, they said they think it's a young person, and one person in the class said, something with this narrator of the curious incident, something with this narrator is not quite right. This narrator is telling me things that are not important. There is detail, the style. So this young woman actually got onto the point that the narrator of the curious incident, okay, is a young man, a teenager with Asperger's syndrome. And the things that he tells us are things that very often narrators don't tell us. Okay, so it's quite interesting. This, just to give you the background, the narrator is a woman. It's an autobiographical novel called By Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept, by a woman called Elizabeth Smart. So if you Google Elizabeth Smart, you will find the story. And it's the story, she picked up a book of poems by a poet called George Barker and fell in love with the poet, started corresponding with him, and she brought him and his wife from Japan to the United States. Okay, so she brought him, and suddenly there was also a wife. And then she started an affair with him, they had children, and it's a very poetic novel in this style, okay? So there's a lot here that is hidden, and therefore it's such a great text for this type of task. Okay, I'm sorry this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm trying to just give you different tasks and what they're good for, okay? So you will excuse me if we don't go into great detail. The next task type is reconstructing a poem from jumbled lines. This is quite a difficult task, and what I do it with a poem called Lonely Hearts by Wendy Cope. And on your page, on page 7 of your handout, I've given you what I do with it. And what I do is we talk about adverts, Lonely Heart adverts, okay, where people advertise for somebody to meet. And it's interesting that in 2016, with the internet, in the newspapers, you still have sections like that, okay? And we talk about the language that people use. And then I say, okay, I've got a poem. There are 19 lines. Some of them are repeated. I want you to construct a poem from these lines. What I actually do normally is I cut them in strips. I have envelopes with strips. Each line is on a strip. And then groups sit and they rearrange the poem. Okay? And they come up with really fantastic stuff. It's almost impossible to get the real poem, but that doesn't matter. Okay? This task works because very often in these adverts, you get a lot of very formulaic phrases, very stereotypical things. Okay? So we're not going to have time to do this, but this is the activity. And actually, I've given you the full poem later on page 11. Okay? Because I thought if we do this, I don't want you to see it. But if you're interested in this poem, it's on page 11. This is a task that I've also seen, for example, used with a very, very moving poem and very problematic poem from the Second World War, written by a poet who was killed in the Second World War and so on. And for me, this type of tasks works for certain poems, but not if the poem is very serious and darker and so on. Okay. The next task I want to look at is using art as this is the poem. Okay, so using art as a prompt for creative writing. And I came across this poem by the American poet Gregory Warren Wilson. And it was written in response to a painting. The painting is, well, two paintings by Musashi, a Japanese artist, Wild Goose with Reeds, and Shrike on a Dead Tree at the Shimada Museum of Art, Kumamoto. And Gregory Wilson wrote this poem, The Sound of Fox Paws in the Snow, a maple leaf landing on water, a heron high overhead, icicles melting, a crow preening its wing, the language of flames dancing along a blade. So a very simple poem, just with images. Okay, these are all, if you notice, noun phrases, just images, just describing things. So what I've done is I've given you a painting, okay? There's a painting for each 2 or 3 of you, and I'd like you to write a poem in response to this. And one of the things you can do is just write 4 or 5 noun phrases about your poem. Okay? So I'm going to give you actually very little time, 3-4 minutes to try and do that. Okay? I have about 4.5 minutes, and I've got 6 more activities. So we'll have, time planning was never my strong thing. So we're going to hear a couple of poems. The first group, the group on this side, you were writing a poem. Ooh, this is very dark. I didn't realize it would come out so dark so this is the painting that they were responding to. Okay? So do you want to read to us? Would somebody like to read? Irene, I'm sorry, I heard you, but then we'll hear somebody else. Okay, so this is a poem written in response to this.
The time passed away. Nothing else
to do that day. He hadn't said a word to her, but she kept listening to him in her head. That was the moment she knew it was the right time to go.
Okay.
So again, this description of boredom, and this painting is actually called Ennui. It's by Walter Sickert. It's called Boredom. Okay? Anybody else who wrote a response to this and is willing to read to us? No? Yes? No? Yes? Or no? Okay, go on then.
I think you need to read clear, more clearly now.
The immortality of roses which were covered in glass.
Again.
The immortality of roses which were covered in glass. The invisible smoke that got into our lungs. Half empty glass of water, half full glass of air. The dreams of a child never allowed to be free.
Can you read that again?
I didn't quite get the last two lines. Can you just read that again and very clearly? Huh? You're a teacher and standing in front of a class. Yep.
The immortality of roses which were covered in glass. The invisible smoke that got into our lungs. Half empty glass of water, half full glass of air. The dreams of a child never allowed to be free.
Right. Okay, did you get that? Quite interesting. So again, you worked with images, but you actually transformed the images, right? And the line that I didn't get, you said a glass half full with water, a glass half full with air, right? Yeah, and the second one was the one that I didn't get, because actually what you've done is switch. You made the air, it is full of air. It's not a glass. So again, so what he's done is he's transformed the imagery. Okay, he's played around with the imagery quite cleverly. Okay, so getting this. Okay, and again, it's interesting how you followed. Again, you had these noun phrases, and I thought they worked. Okay, so again, very two different approaches. Okay, Irene had the rhyme, but again focused on the boredom and named it, whereas you did something different, just working with the images. Okay, the next picture. Which is this, on this side, that probably is also, they're not coming out very well, maybe it's because of that. Okay, so it's this one. Would somebody like to read on this side? Yes.
Again, I'm going to stop you. When you read out to your class, you have to read very, very, very clearly. We don't have it in front of us. I'm sorry, I'm preaching now. I'm the
dominating expert, huh? Yeah, but you really have to stand and you have to read very clearly and project. Very.
Go on.
A celebration of life, a musician on the ground, flashes of light, joy in the crowd.
Joy in the
Crowd. Okay, joy in the crowd. Great, so you did something again, sort of with these just noun phrases. Okay, did you find it easy to do? It's because once you do that, actually it gives you a certain format that you can work to. Okay? Anybody else want to read from this group? Yes.
Notes vibrating in the air, melodic shouts among the trees, colors dancing in a ray, the sound of magic steps, feeling the shaky air.
What's the last one?
Feeling
okay. Feeling
the shaky air.
Feeling the air. Okay, so again, you did the same thing sort of with noun phrases. Notice how having a painting and having a format actually frees you. It's one of these paradoxes, okay? If you've got restrictions, sometimes it makes you freer as a creator. Okay, I'm going to zoom through very quickly a few other ideas. This is the painting of St. George and the Dragon by Uccello. Maybe we need to turn off the light here. Okay. So this is St. George and the Dragon and the Princess. And what I've done with classes is I've asked them to sit in groups. One group is the princess, and you write her point of view, narrate something from her point of view. Another group is the dragon. Another group is St. George. And then I take one person from each group, and I put them in a new group, and they have to write a poem from their three perspectives together. And then there is a wonderful poem by the poet Ursula Fanthorpe called Not My Best Side, which is about this painting written in exactly the same way. It's a monologue of the three protagonists in this painting. Another thing I do is that I use paintings to predict what is going to happen in a story. So I found a wonderful painting by Edward Hopper called New York Movie. And again, I'm going to turn off the light for us to see it. And what I ask people to do is to write a paragraph about this woman and what she's thinking about and what her job is. And every time, and this I used with my students in Israel, and they would write, oh, she's bored, she has a routine life, she's thinking about her boyfriend, they're going to get married, she wants him to help her escape. And this I then used as a lead-in to a story by James Joyce called Eveline, which is exactly about this. A young woman of 19 who wants to escape from her life with a man who has proposed to her. It's one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read, and a very important story. And this is the first paragraph. And the students actually wrote almost something similar when they were looking at that picture. So what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes you find the right picture to introduce a story. Okay. The next task type, for which we won't have time, is that I ask students to read something in groups. So I ask students to sit together and, in their groups, construct a reading of a poem, a performance. And the poem that I've given you to illustrate it is again by Wendy Cope, and it's about bullying or children in the playground that are not wanted. You know how when you choose children to be on teams? Do you do that in Spain? You know, sort of when you play sports or you play football, okay, or you know, sort of one person is the leader of the team, you start choosing and so on, and there's always somebody who's left last, whom nobody wants on their team. Okay? So this is a poem written by that person. That's the narrator. Okay? And I think it's a very poignant poem. And you can do it, you can construct it because there are different speakers here. There's the narrator, there's the other boys, there's the teacher. So you can have all sorts of games with that, okay? So the rule is that everybody in the group needs to take part in the reading, but different people can read different lines. And then the last task that you've got is an extract from a play by Athol Fugard. And the way we thought of introducing it is talking about games and make-believe. Did you play make-believe games when you were a child? Then which games would you be able to play with this car? And then reading the extract from the play, again, something you can do in groups. Fine. On page 14 of your handout, there is a list of principles for using literature. I've illustrated some of these principles, some of these I haven't. If you look at this handout again at home, look at these and think, which of these have I illustrated? Which of these are important to you? Which of these maybe I didn't illustrate? Which of these do you disagree? This is in a way a checklist for you to think about and reflect on this session, because there's been a lot in this session. I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. So this is a way for you maybe to go back and think about it and think, which principles have I illustrated and which I haven't. You also have a reference list, and if you have any questions, I didn't give you my email here, but you can Google me, and if you have any questions about what I did, or if you ever do try some of these activities, either write to me with questions or write and tell me about what you did. Okay, I'm really sorry I went on for so long, but I'll stop now. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.